All right, buckle up because we're about to take a deep dive into some seriously interesting stuff. Reactions to the Super Bowl, some unexpected political turns, personal anecdotes.
Sounds intriguing.
Oh, it is. All through the lens of this local Kansas City radio show and podcast. It's called Past Week, Next Week.
Okay.
The hosts are Chris and Paul, and they kick off their show with a really interesting choice of music. I'm a Loser by the Beatles. Can you guess why?
I'm a loser after the Super Bowl. I'm guessing they're Chiefs fans.
You got it. They're diehards. And this episode was recorded just days after Super Bowl 57's. So it gives us this really raw, unfiltered look at how everyday people process these big events, especially when it involves their hometown team.
That's fascinating. So did they go full doom and gloom after the loss of the Eagles?
Oh, absolutely. Paul, one of the hosts, he even showed up in all black the day after the game, like full morning attire.
Wow, that's dedication.
Right. And Chris, the other host, he was talking about how before the game even started, he took a walk around the block to prepare for all the sitting he'd be doing during the game. That's how pumped he was.
So from pre-game rituals to post-game morning attire, it sounds like they were all in.
Totally. But, and this is what I love about these guys, even though they were bummed, they still found a way to, make light of the situation.
Oh, I like it.
Paul was joking about giving himself 3 days to grieve, almost like it was a funeral before moving on.
I mean, hey, for some fans, it really is that serious.
Seriously. But Chris, he actually brings up a really good point. He's like, everyone's so focused on the loss, but they're forgetting that the Chiefs made history just by getting to the Super Bowl for the third time in a row.
That's a great point. It's easy to get caught up in the immediate win or loss.
Yeah, he even calls out the media for, for flip-flopping on their assessment of the Chiefs based on a single game. Which is kind of funny because this radio show is, part of the media.
That self-awareness is always refreshing. So besides the game itself, were there any other interesting Super Bowl moments they talked about?
Oh, yeah, plenty. So apparently Taylor Swift was there, a known Chiefs fan, and the Eagles fans, they booed her.
No way, even Taylor Swift.
Even Taylor Swift. And then get this, former President Trump was there too.
Oh, wow.
And Chris and Paul were saying that he got both cheers and boos.
That's a mixed bag of reactions.
Yeah, they thought it was interesting that Fox didn't show that part on their broadcast, the booing part.
Huh. I wonder why. It's amazing how even something like a Super Bowl broadcast can become, a topic of conversation about what's being shown and what's not.
Exactly. Oh, and then there's this whole thing about Trump leaving the game early.
Really? Why do you do that?
Okay, so this is where things get a little interesting. Paul said he heard on TikTok that Trump left because he had an accident.
Wait, an accident?
He didn't go into detail, but he was speculating about, maybe a cover-up involving a body double. Typical Paul.
Okay, that's hilarious, but he definitely falls into the category of take it with a grain of salt.
For sure. Now, moving on to something a little more artistic, Krim had some strong opinions about Kendrick Lamar's halftime performance.
What do you think?
He seemed, both confused and fascinated by it. He was saying he didn't really get the hidden messages, all the symbolism.
That's fair. Lamar's work can be pretty layered.
Right. But then Chris is also like, this guy is incredibly talented, a Pulitzer Prize winner. So it's this weird mix of admiration and bewilderment.
It does make you think about how we approach art. Do you need to fully understand it to appreciate it? Or can you just enjoy the experience even if you miss some of the deeper meaning?
Exactly. There was one part that really caught his attention, though, and maybe sparked a bit of an awkward conversation. One of the dancers did this crip walk.
Yeah, I've seen videos of that.
So Chris and Paul, they're both like, she's an amazing dancer, but then they start talking about the origins of the dance, how it's associated with the Crips gang in Los Angeles, and how it made its way into hip-hop culture.
That's an important context to consider.
And then, to make things even more interesting, this particular dancer also happens to have, a past relationship with Drake.
Oh, wow. So there's a whole backstory there.
Right. It's even in a performance as big as the Super Bowl halftime show, you have these little details that, if you know the backstory, add this whole other layer of meaning.
It's like a hidden world within a world.
Exactly. All right. So we've covered the game, the halftime show. What else? Oh, the commercials. Apparently, they were pretty memorable this year.
Really? Memorable in a good way or a bad way?
Well, Chris and Paul were particularly struck by this bizarre seal-themed commercial. And then there was this creepy cowboy hat ad, which left them kind of, bewildered.
Okay, I'm going to have to look those up later. I'm curious now.
Definitely worth a watch. But then their friend Boogie, He was super excited about this Doritos commercial with an alien.
An alien?
Yeah.
That's random. What was so special about it?
Well, it turns out the creators of that commercial, they were just regular people who won a contest to have their idea produced.
That's awesome. I love when big brands do stuff like that, giving everyday folks a shot.
Me too. Oh, and they also mentioned this local Missouri Department of Transportation commercial that they liked.
Really? What was it about?
Pretty standard PSA stuff, but the actor in it, Jacob Tyre, his dad's friend of the show.
Ah, so that personal connection made it more interesting for them.
Yeah, definitely adds that local flavor.
It's always fun to see those familiar faces pop up in unexpected places. So we've covered the Super Bowl, halftime show, and the commercials. What else is on their agenda this week?
Well, they always share some stuff from their personal lives, like Chris had a dentist appointment, a dermatologist appointment, even had a disappointing meal at Schlotsky's.
Schlotsky's? Ouch, that's rough.
Right. He also talked about Valentine's Day dinner with his wife, Jane, at McCormick and Schmick's. But, get this, he accidentally made the reservation for March 14th instead of February 14th.
Oops. That's a pretty big Valentine's Day fail.
He was kicking himself for that one. But hey, at least they got a romantic dinner out of it, even if it was a month late.
Exactly. A date night is a date night, right?
Yeah.
So, did they talk about any movies or TV shows this week?
Chris recommended this movie called A Real Pain with Kieran Culkin and Jesse Eisenberg. Said he liked it because it had a simple storyline.
That's interesting. Simple storylines can be refreshing sometimes, especially after a long day.
Mm.
Did Paul have any recommendations?
He was talking about wanting to watch this Netflix show Paradise, but Chris had already tried watching it and gave up because he thought the plot was too complicated.
Ah, so we've got contrasting viewing habits here.
Right. Chris likes straightforward narratives, while Paul seems to be more into those complex, multi-layered stories. Makes you wonder if that'll become, like, a point of contention between them later on.
Stay tuned for the next deep dive to find out.
Exactly. Okay, get ready for this because we're about to jump headfirst into the world of politics, and things are about to get interesting. Past Week, Next Week has this new segment called President Trump's Promises Made, Promises Kept, and let me tell you, it's a lot to unpack.
Okay, I'm all ears. What kind of promises are we talking about here?
They start off by dropping this bombshell. Elon Musk is now running the U.S. government.
Wait, what? Elon Musk, as in the Tesla and SpaceX guy.
The one and only. Apparently, this is all happening under Trump's directive. They even talked about Musk giving a press conference from the Oval Office.
Okay, now that is a twist I did not see coming.
Right, and it doesn't stop there. They go on to detail Trump's efforts to, reshape the FBI. He's requiring new employees to acknowledge him as their real boss during interviews.
Wow, that's a pretty bold move and definitely raises some questions about, the chain of command and authority within the FBI.
Totally. And his plan to appoint Kash Patel as the new head of the FBI. That's another big one.
Patel's a controversial figure for sure. This is going to be interesting to follow.
It is. And then they share this really concerning story about Trump demanding that charges against Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City, be dropped.
Wow, that's getting into some potentially dangerous territory, interfering with legal proceedings like that.
Right. And they said he even threatened to fire the attorneys in the Southern District of New York who wouldn't comply.
This is raising some serious red flags about the potential abuse of power. It's definitely something worth paying attention to.
Agreed. Okay, let's switch gears for a moment and see how the American people are reacting to all this. Chris brings up this BuzzFeed article. It's titled, Trump Supporters Share How He Could Lose Their Support.
So we're getting into the mindset of Trump's base here. What kind of responses stood out to them?
There were two that they really focused on. One person said they would stop supporting Trump if he didn't follow through on these specific promises.
Okay, what kind of promises?
They wanted him to deport all illegal migrants, eliminate DEI, purge the FBI, and ban transgender people. That was their list.
That's a pretty specific and, let's just say, divisive set of demands.
Yeah.
Gives you a sense of what some of his supporters are prioritizing.
Right. And then the other response that caught their attention, it was from someone who was saying they immediately regretted voting for Trump.
Wow, a complete 180. Why the change of heart?
They felt like Trump wasn't optimistic enough, not positive or hopeful. They were disillusioned with his leadership.
So even within his base, there's this spectrum of opinions and levels of satisfaction.
Exactly. It just shows how complex these political allegiances can be. Okay, let's take a break from all the serious stuff for a second. Remember that book Chris and Paul wrote about their misadventures?
Oh yeah, Past Week, Next Week, Misadventures, right?
Yeah.
Whatever happened to that?
Well, it turns out Boogie's dog, Raven, decided to get involved.
Oh no, what did Raven do?
The dog literally shredded the book, ripped it to pieces.
You're kidding. What did Boogie say about that?
They were all joking about it, saying that Raven must hated the content so much that it had to destroy the physical copy.
That's hilarious.
But
I wonder what was in that book that Raven found so objectionable.
right. Maybe it was a bad review of dog treats or something.
Maybe. All right, well, after that lighthearted moment, it sounds like Chris and Paul are ready to dive into some deeper topics. They were talking earlier about feeling disillusioned with society, remember?
Yeah, Paul, he's the one who said he was tired of sharing the obligation of society with idiots.
That's a pretty strong statement.
It is, and he went on to talk about how exhausting it is to see people rejecting facts, the normalization of violence, the way social media creates these echo chambers where everyone just hears what they want to hear.
I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling of frustration, you know?
Totally. He even talked about this idea of false equivalence, how the media often gives equal weight to opposing viewpoints, even when one side is clearly based on, misinformation or just plain nonsense.
That's a tricky issue. It's important to present both sides of a story, but also to be mindful of not legitimizing harmful or misleading information.
It's a tough balance to strike. But what I really appreciated about Paul's rant is that it came from a place of genuine concern. He wasn't just complaining, he was pleading with people to be better, to be nicer, to think before they act, and to appreciate the good things in life.
It's a message of hope amidst the frustration, a reminder that we can still choose to be decent human beings, even in a world that often feels like it's falling apart.
Exactly. He's not giving up, he's challenging us to do better.
And that's a powerful message to end on. So after that deep dive into the Super Bowl, politics, and personal reflections, what's next on the agenda for Chris and Paul?
Well, they've got a lot more to say, and we've got a lot more to unpack. So stay tuned for part 2 of this deep dive, where we'll explore more of their show and see what other gems of wisdom they have to share.
Can't wait.
Welcome back. Seems like Chris and Paul are ready to shift gears now and lighten things up a bit after that pretty heavy discussion. They're moving into their headlines and predictions segment.
I love this part. It's where they, take a look at the week's news and try to predict what's going to happen next.
Exactly. And it usually leads to some pretty hilarious takes.
Well, they're not always right, but they're always entertaining. So what's on their radar this week?
First up, the Senate is moving ahead with more of President Trump's cabinet picks, and there are some key votes coming up next week.
Okay, any big names in the mix?
Get this. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has been confirmed as the nation's Health and Human Services Secretary.
Oh, RFK Jr. That's a pretty controversial pick, especially given his stance on vaccines.
It is, and of course, Paul couldn't resist making a joke about it. He said that Kennedy has appointed his brainworm to look into the vaccine issue.
Oh, Paul. Always with the jokes, even when it comes to serious stuff like public health.
Next headline. Vice President J.D. Vance is scheduled to meet with Ukraine President Zelensky in Germany.
Okay, this is getting into some serious geopolitical territory now.
And there's been a major development in the conflict. Apparently, a Russian drone has struck and destroyed the nuclear power plant in Chernobyl.
Oh, wow. That's a huge escalation.
Vance is even warning that the U.S. might have to send troops to Ukraine.
That's a big statement. Things are definitely heating up over there.
But leave it to Paul to find a way to make light of even this situation. He's saying the troops Vance is talking about are actually just himself, Tulsi Gabbard, and Tucker Carlson, and they're going to go over there and have a fellatio contest judged by Putin.
Okay, that's definitely crossing a line, even for Paul. Sometimes his humor can be a little too out there.
Yeah, that one was a bit much, even for me. But I guess it's his way of coping with all the, the stress and anxiety of what's happening in the world.
Yeah, I get it. When things feel overwhelming, sometimes you just got to laugh, even if it's a little dark.
All right, last headline for this segment. Apple and Google have restored TikTok to their U.S. app stores after President Trump signed an executive order delaying a ban on the platform.
Oh, interesting. So TikTok lives to see another day. What was the reason for the delay?
Trump is claiming that he was happy to save TikTok, but is requiring them to change the name to App of America.
App of America?
Yeah.
Really? That's kind of ridiculous.
I know, right? Paul's response was, I saw that one coming a mile away.
He's probably not the only one. It wouldn't be the first time Trump has made, let's say, interesting demands when it comes to tech companies.
And that's it for headlines and predictions. Quite a roller coaster of emotions, right?
Yeah, from serious concerns about global conflict to outlandish jokes about political figures. It's never a dull moment with these guys.
Okay, let's circle back to that Beatles song they played at the beginning of the episode. Remember, they chose I'm a Loser as their song of the week, but they never actually explained why.
Right, it's been bugging me this whole time. They just said it was connected to the Kansas City Chiefs in the past 57 years.
It's a real head-scratcher. I have no idea what they're getting at. They did mention that the song choice was a nod to their book, Past Week, Next Week, Misadventures.
Maybe the book holds the key to this mystery. Perhaps there's some event in Chiefs history, a big win or a crushing defeat that happened
Yeah.
57 years ago.
Or maybe it's something more metaphorical, like representing the ups and downs of being a diehard fan.
Who knows? It's a puzzle for sure. Maybe we'll have to read the book ourselves to find out.
Exactly. The only way to solve the mystery. All right. Well, that about wraps up this deep dive into Past Week, Next Week. We've explored their reactions to the Super Bowl, delved into their personal lives, and even navigated the twists and turns of their political commentary. It's been quite a ride.
They're a fascinating duo. They're passionate, they're opinionated, and they're always entertaining.
They definitely keep things interesting, and they offer this really unique perspective on current events and pop culture. It's a good reminder that it's okay to laugh even when things feel crazy.
Absolutely. And that engaging in these kinds of conversations, even when they're tough, is really important. They make us think, they challenge us, and sometimes they even make us laugh.
So if you're looking for a show that's both thought-provoking and entertaining, Past Week, Next Week is definitely worth checking out. You might be surprised by what you discover, and who knows, maybe you'll even be the one to crack the code of that Beatles song.
That's a challenge I'm willing to accept.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with me. It's been fun.
Me too. And thanks to all of you for listening. We'll catch you next time for another deep dive into the world of podcasts. All right, welcome back to our deep dives into Past Week, Next Week. We've covered a lot of ground. There are Super Bowl reactions, political commentary, all that. But now I want to circle back to a segment they do called Easy Reader.
Easy Reader, that's where they talk about their book, right?
Exactly. Past Week, Next Week, Misadventures.
Yeah.
It's their autobiography, kind of a behind-the-scenes look at their lives.
So did they share any juicy tidbits from the book this week? Well, they talked about how Boogie's dog, Raven, the one who loved the Doritos commercial?
Yeah, what about him?
Raven got a hold of their book.
Oh no, what do you do?
Shredded it, ripped it to pieces. They're joking that the dog must have hated the content so much he just had to destroy it.
That's hilarious. I wonder what Raven found so offensive in there.
I know, right? Okay, before we wrap up, I want to go back to something Paul said earlier that really stuck with me. He said he was tired of sharing the obligation of society with fit idiots.
Yeah, that was a pretty powerful statement. It really got me thinking, too.
I think he spoke for a lot of people who are just exhausted by all the negativity, the misinformation, the just plain stupidity that we see every day.
And the way social media amplifies all of that creates these echo chambers where people only hear what they want to hear.
It's tough to navigate, but what I appreciated about Paul's rant is that it came from a place of genuine concern, He wasn't just complaining, he was challenging us to be better.
To be more mindful, to be more engaged, to think critically about the information we're consuming.
And to just be nicer to each other, It's not that complicated. So, yeah, Chris and Paul, they're funny, they're opinionated, but they also make you think. They don't shy away from the tough stuff.
They keep it real.
Yeah.
And that's what makes their show so compelling. It's like listening in on a conversation with your friends, but they're talking about the big issues, the things that really matter.
Exactly. And sometimes they throw in some ridiculous jokes about Putin judging a fellatio contest, but hey, you got to keep things interesting, right?
Whatever works. So what's the final verdict? Would you recommend Past Week, Next Week to our listeners?
Absolutely. If you're looking for a show that's both entertaining and thought-provoking, this is it. They offer this really unique perspective on current events, pop culture, everything in between. Plus, you might just be the one to crack the code of that mysterious Beatles song.
Yeah, that's still bugging me. Maybe we'll have to do a follow-up episode once we've had a chance to dig into their book and see if we can find any clues.
That's a great idea. All right, well, that wraps up our deep dive into Past Week, Next Week. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next time for another exploration of the podcast world.